Finding Our Common Thread is recorded at the PPL Public Media Center at PBS 39 in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and is produced in conjunction with Lehigh University's Global Citizenship Program.
Welcome to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I'm your host, Tracy Yatsko. Finding Our Common Thread is a three-part discussion on current topics that affect us all. PBS 39 has partnered with Lehigh University's Global Citizenship Program to host each of these events. Tonight, in our final discussion, we will cover the topic of LGBTQ rights and gender equity. Defining ourselves as individuals is a personal liberty we each have. However, society makes decisions through cultural norms and policy that interpret and legislate acceptable in ways that infringe on individuals' rights. Norms and policies can be redefined to make a more inclusive and equitable society for all. I'm again joined by Sydney Otapi and Angie Rizzo, two students from Lehigh University. Sydney is a senior from Maryland studying journalism, graphic design, and global studies. As a member of Lehigh University's Global Citizenship Program, she traveled to Cambodia and focused on exploring the public health initiatives in the country. Her next stop is New York City to work in marketing. Angie is a Lehigh Valley native majoring in global studies with a minor in Latin American studies. She has studied abroad several times, doing a service trip to Antigua, learning in Indonesia, Cambodia, Israel, Palestine, and interning in India. This summer, she also plans to intern in Costa Rica. Sydney, Angie, thank you for co-hosting this event and for putting this together as a part of your capstone. Can you please introduce us to the panelists?
Thank you, Tracy. Our panel includes Scott Burden, the Associate Director of the Pride Center at Lehigh University. He attended Grand Valley State University, studying in their master's program for college student affairs leadership.
Rita Jones has been the director for the Center for Gender Equity at Lehigh University for the past 10 years. She received a master's and PhD in English from Washington State University.
Adrian Shanker is the Executive Director of the Bradbury Sullivan LGBTQ Community Center. As a specialist in LGBT health policy, Adrian has helped develop campaigns to advance health equity for LGBT Pennsylvanians through policy, behavioral, and clinical changes. Thank you to our panelists for participating in our program.
Before we continue, I want to ask the panelists to help us with a few definitions. Rita, can you define gender equity?
Yeah, so gender equity is when people can bring their whole selves, all parts of their gender, sex, and sexuality to whatever personal or professional space they happen to be in. So another way to think about gender equity as opposed to gender equality is an idea of an image where there are three people trying to look over a fence, and they're all of different heights. So one of them can see over the fence just fine and gets to watch a baseball game. The other one has to stand on their tiptoes, maybe gets tired, can't see over. The third one can't reach over the fence. If I gave them all the same height of box, the first two might be able to see over the fence, but the second one or the third one can't. That's equality. I'm giving them equal boxes. Equity is when I provide them the box they need in order to achieve the goals that they have.
Wow, thank you so much. And Scott, can you tell our audience what does LGBTQ stand for and what are other variations?
Yeah, absolutely. So the LGBTQ plus acronym stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And the Q oftentimes stands for queer and or questioning. And the plus stands for a myriad of different identities, which can include anything from asexuality, demisexual, and it's important to note that in the Pride Center at Lehigh, we use LGBTQIA+, and the I and the A stand for intersex and asexual. There's some debate as to if the A stands for ally or asexual, and in terms of the way that we do it in the Pride Center, the A stands for asexual.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. And Adrian, can you define transgender for our audience?
Absolutely. Everybody has a gender identity, whether they're cisgender or transgender. Cisgender means that your gender identity matches your sex assigned at birth, and transgender is a broad term that can mean a number of different things to different people, but generally suggests that your gender identity is different from the sex you were assigned at birth.
Okay. Thank you so much. For the first part of our program, we will be asking our studio audience to participate in live polling of topic questions. We will then share the results and have our panelists further reflect on the topic. Sydney, let's begin.
All right, so our first polling question will be, Health problems such as substance abuse and suicide are higher in LGBTQ populations. True or false?
I'm going to give it some time. You can see the polling up on the screen. Okay. Let's wait a few more seconds to see if it changes. Okay, so 100% of the audience says true. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, discrimination against LGBTQ persons has been associated with high rates of psychiatric disorders, substance abuse, and suicide. Experiences of violence and victimization are frequent for LGBTQ individuals and have long-lasting effects on the individual and the community. Angie?
Thank you, Tracy. For our next live polling question, we ask, what is the wage gap between men and women? There is no wage gap, 60 cents to the dollar, 80 cents to the dollar, or 90 cents to the dollar.
I think we have a very knowledgeable audience. Give it a few more seconds. Okay, so it looks like the whole studio audience said 80 cents to the dollar. According to the American Association of University Women, in 2016, women working full-time in the United States typically were paid just 80 cents to the dollar of what men were paid, a gap of 20%. Now we will follow up with questions for our panelists. Sydney, can you give us the next poll?
So our next polling question will be, how well is our society promoting gender equity? 5 being very well and 1 being very poor.
Can you give us some time? Okay. So the majority is at 3. I'm going to toss this one to Rita first. What does gender equity look like for you on a political scale?
That's such a complex and wonderful question. So I think that there are a lot of tendencies to go quickly to the wage gap and pay equity because it's a solid, definable, statistically relevant one. And definitely it needs to happen. The question about 80 cents to the dollar demonstrates the complexity of that question when we think about how some of the labor laws in Pennsylvania have failed a lot of women-identified persons. So we are actually behind the 80% in the 80 cents in Pennsylvania. And if we factor in race, that changes significantly. So Latinas are down to 52 cents to the dollar, for example. I think that gender equity politically would include family leave and family building policies. It would include child care, elder care, sibling care policies. There's just a wealth of ways to think about what gender equity would look like on a political scale. It's not just having women-identified folks in public spaces that are elected. It's also those people who are thinking about everyone's gendered selves when they're in those spaces. So those are some examples.
Would anyone like to add anything?
I'd like to add that I think that gender equity is also about thinking about gender more broadly and allowing people to allowing people from historically underrepresented genders, including women, in if we're talking about political gender equity, but in other spaces we might be talking about people that don't identify as men or women. They might identify as non-binary, and allowing them to find their space and their voice in a world that often hides those voices and doesn't allow people's voices to rise if they're not from a group that is in a position of power.
Thank you. Angie?
Thank you. For our next live polling question, we ask, how well is our society promoting LGBTQ rights? 5 being very well and 1 being very poor.
So we're leaning to the poor side. Okay, we have a few people saying the opposite. Ooh, okay. We have a decent mix in here. I'm going to toss this one to Adrian. In regards to LGBTQ rights, has our society progressed in the past several decades? And in your opinion, what policies need to be produced and prioritized?
Well, I think that over the past several decades, LGBT rights have moved exponentially. We've gone from a time and place only 50 years ago where LGBT people were living in the shadows at best, where a gay person could be thrown out of a job in the federal government just for being gay. Right, and we've come now to a place where we can identify our gender the way that we see ourselves, where same-sex couples have legal rights to marriage, and where people can serve openly in the military and in their lives and in society. And yet we still have so far to go. So the LGBT political and civil rights movement has been fast-moving in the ways that we look at social movements, and yet that's not necessarily always enough, because when we're looking at our rights today, we still, in Pennsylvania, 70% of Pennsylvania LGBT people can be fired from their jobs, denied housing. You can even erect a heterosexuals-only water fountain here in most of Pennsylvania. We have no comprehensive laws around school bullying that protect LGBT youth. Conversion therapy is legal in Pennsylvania, except for in just a couple of municipalities. And we have a lot more work to do. And our rights are also being threatened, both in Washington and in Harrisburg, with efforts by political leaders that don't understand the hard-fought victories that we've won and what they mean for our lives. And here in Pennsylvania, LGBT people especially lack health equity. Not only do we experience health disparities at higher rates, but there are structural barriers that are policy-driven that get in the way. So we have a roadmap from here to equity, and it's still a long way to go. It's a long drive, and we're not there yet, but we've come a long way. And we should always remember that there's been people that have been paving that path for many years.
Would anyone like to add?
I think part of what I would add is building on those ideas about discrimination and harassment, hate crimes. So both the way in which, if we were to beef up those spaces, we're going to benefit everyone. We're going to create a lot more equity, and particularly underrepresented folks. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is, and this is like something that I'm experiencing right now with my partner, we're currently looking at housing, and thankfully we've secured something, but we've had to ask ourselves the question, because of that reality that in the state of Pennsylvania, housing discrimination does exist, especially for queer folks, and we've had to ask ourselves, do I call you my roommate? Do I call you my friend? And that's just a little question that is in our head, right? Like that there's the potential there, right? And we know that hate crime legislation doesn't stop hate crimes, right? And they're very hard to enforce. So asking those broader questions and looking for the ways in which we can challenge these gender norms and challenge these realities is of critical importance.
And how do we challenge?
That's a great question. I think tuning into conversations like these is a really great start. I think being willing to situate yourself as a learner is a really important function of that as well. I think if we can humble ourselves to know that we don't know what we don't know, right? And challenge ourselves to engage across difference and learn about people's differing realities, that starts. And being engaged in political advocacy. It's not just at these individual levels that we have to work to create justice or gender equity or LGBTQ rights. It also is at an institutional level as well.
Thank you. Sydney?
Thank you. So our next polling question will be, do you think that current laws protect, jeopardize, or have no effect on transgender individuals?
Okay, we'll just give it a few more seconds. And it's moving. So we're a little split there. Scott, recently there have been policies created that may be considered anti-transgender. So how do we address this and better integrate transgender individuals in our community?
Yeah, that is a really great and profound question. I think the first thing that I might challenge is this kind of a more of like a philosophical notion. Is it our goal to integrate individuals into a society as it exists? So specifically looking at like a Western American context, we know that there has been structures that have been created that create these problems that we're talking about, right? So, and this is rooted in anti-blackness, in the slave trade, in the enslavement of people, right? And then from that has come so many different lived realities that promote these normalized gender experiences, this internalized understanding of what it means to paint one's nails or wear heels, or all of these realities, right? And so my question is, I'm not sure if we want to integrate into that, right? But instead question how can we transform it, right? And I'm not necessarily the best equipped to answer all of that, but what I do know is that there are things that we can do, from political advocacy to speaking out against laws that do promote hate and exclusion of transgender individuals. So an example of this, and people may be familiar with it popping up throughout the country, are bathroom laws that aim to quote unquote protect people from predators in bathrooms, under this guise that transgender individuals are violent or are predators. And that's a really horrific set of ideology that is rooted in some of that stuff that I mentioned earlier. And so really great way is to show up and speak out against those sorts of policies, and to educate yourself on why those policies are actually really harmful, right? And who they actually are targeting, because in reality it's transgender folks, right? And I think it's also important to look at not just policies that are going to impact transgender individuals, but we know that transgender women of color are paid the least. Speaking of that, the pay equity. And so we know that there are things that we can do to advocate on behalf of those populations and really cast our net more wide, instead of focusing on things like marriage equality, which actually leave out like a large amount of individuals. Not that marriage equality is a bad thing, but how can we challenge that reality and cast the net wider so that we all benefit from whatever it is that we're advocating for.
Can I add?
Absolutely.
So I love the idea that Scott mentions about transforming society, and legal equality isn't always about being normal just like everyone else. It's also about being free to be who you are. And so I love that, but I want to go back to the original question about policies that are harming the transgender community and that are designed to harm the transgender community. So right now in Washington, we have an administration that has time and time again gone into the weeds of federal policy to look for ways to do harm. Especially when we're talking about transgender health, the creation of what we would call the Division of Discrimination at Health and Human Services, where the HHS Secretary is offering so-called religious exemptions for healthcare professionals who, by the way, take a pledge to do no harm. He's letting them say that they will not provide care to someone who's transgender. That is a direct attack on people's lived reality of who they are. When the president decided to tweet that transgender people would lose their jobs if they served in the military, you know, lots of people can question lots of things about the military, but a tweet to change policy that would fire huge numbers of people just because they're transgender is a beyond the pale approach to the ways that transgender people deserve to be treated in this society today. And I think that we have to recognize that there are direct attacks on transgender community members, both in Washington and in Harrisburg, that we need to call out. These aren't attacks that are grounded in any social benefit. These are solely designed to harm transgender community members.
Thank you for that input. Angie?
For our next studio audience question, we will be asking, when you meet someone new, do you regularly introduce yourself with gender pronouns? For example, my name is Angie and I use the pronouns she, her, hers. The options are yes, no, and what are pronouns?
Okay. Give it a little bit more time. It's moving. Okay, so again, we're pretty split. Adrian, I'm going to throw this back at you. How does language pose an issue in the gender equity LGBTQ rights? And how can we get to a point where we don't define gender expression or sexuality as normal or abnormal?
I think that language is beautiful. And that one thing that's wonderful about the LGBT movement is that historically and today, we have the ability to define ourselves in the ways that make sense for our lives and our bodies and our truths. So we can use the identities that make sense for who we are. And we can talk about our genders and our sexual orientations in ways that are affirming for how we feel we want to be seen in the world. So language is special in the LGBT community in that we give ourselves permission to recreate language and to queer language, to meet our needs, to define ourselves in the ways that are authentic. And yet that can sometimes be challenging when we're speaking to people that are not from within the LGBT community and who don't always understand the language that we're using. So as Executive Director at Bradbury Sullivan LGBT Community Center, we're conscious that we want to both serve the LGBT community and serve as a resource for the community at large that might want to learn about the LGBT community. So we use the term LGBT. We try to use language that is commonly understood so that we can serve as that common ground for lots of people in the community. And yet we still try to respect people's individual identities by using the language that they use when we're talking to them.
Thank you. Rita, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to women's and feminist movement. There've been, like, what is woman? What does that even mean? And I think that in gender equity generally, we're constantly battling the tendency for being put into a box by others. And I think that one big switch that would help a lot of people is if they listened for people to define themselves instead of first defining others. And that's a really hard switch to flip because that's not the way we're socialized, that's not the way we're trained. We want quick answers, we want to be able to look at something and figure out what it is and what to do with it. And if instead I take the time to learn and listen, that takes a while, and it puts me in an unknowing position, and a lot of people don't like to feel that way either.
Thank you. Sydney?
Thank you. So for our final polling question, do you want to get more involved in local initiatives that support LGBTQ rights and gender equity issues? Yes, no, only gender issues, or only LGBTQ issues?
And again, we'll give it some time. We are looking like a strong yes. So Rita, I'm gonna, Rita, being in the Lehigh Valley, what are some of the best ways to engage in gender equity and LGBTQ issues?
Well, one of the best ways is sitting up here with us right now to get involved with the Bradbury Sullivan Center. There are a lot of political advocacy avenues as well. The AAUW has several local branch chapters in the Lehigh Valley, the YWCA, Valley Against Sex Trafficking. There are ways to get involved with Turning Point and Crime Victims Council. I mean, we're really fortunate to have a lot of opportunities for people to become engaged right here in the Valley. And then, of course, all people have to do is travel just a little bit farther to Philly or Harrisburg, and they can make some additional connections.
Scott?
Yeah, I
I
think.
see you smiling.
Well, I love that question, right? Because like you said, there's so many different ways to become involved, and I think it goes back to that having to make like a conscious choice and making that conscious effort to engage, and it really just takes like one email, right? Like one phone call, and I think too, what is important is to like listen to like those nerves. Like if you're feeling nervous and unsure how to move forward with engaging and learning, and just like reach out to people. Just because we work at Lehigh doesn't mean we don't work with the community, right? Like this is an example of that. So we want to also be resources for the community, and we'll direct you towards the Bradbury Sullivan Center, towards the AAUW, and towards these organizations that might be able to cultivate like your desires a little bit better.
And I think that there's, in addition to getting involved in specific organizations, which, as an executive director of a community organization, we obviously love. But in addition to that, anyone who cares about gender equity, LGBT justice, they should vote. And they should be an informed voter by learning who their candidates are and what races are up in every year. They should make sure that they vote in every election, because in every election there's roles that gender equity and LGBT justice are at play. And in addition to that, people can volunteer. They can volunteer in lots of ways. They can volunteer for nonprofits. They can volunteer for candidates that they believe speak to their own values, right? And people can donate to causes that they believe in. And they can also get involved in a personal way by committing to doing things right in their businesses, in their workplaces, in their schools, in terms of respecting people's gender pronouns, in terms of creating inclusive workplaces and schools for LGBT people, for people of all genders, and that's something that we have to do every day.
Thank you all so much. At this time, we are going to ask our studio audience to participate in a breakout session. The audience will be getting into small groups to discuss some of their ideas on tonight's topic. After the breakout session, a representative from each group will share with us their ideas and possible solutions to the topics.
I came out tonight because I was interested in learning more about how the LGBT community is represented within our society.
I think coming out here is furthering my education in the topics, especially in the Lehigh community since I'm not from here.
I think LGBTQ rights gets looked over by a lot of people in society.
There's a long way we have to go in terms of obtaining rights for all LGBTQ folks.
I mean, the community that's outside of the LGBT community, I feel like if they learn more about these communities' rights and what they're going through, that they'll be better appreciative of what they're going through and how to help them.
Coming out here as a community, we educate people that haven't had the opportunity to learn yet.
I think it's important to have community conversations like this because so many things could be prevented if we just have talks about this. Nobody should be discriminated just because of how they identify.
Welcome back to Finding Our Common Thread. I'm your host, Tracy Yatsko. Our audience has now completed their breakout session and are eager to share their talking points on the topic of LGBTQ rights and gender equity. Sydney?
Thank you, Tracy. Let's begin with our first group representative. Please introduce yourself and what topic your group discussed.
My name is Troy Pelletier. Our group discussed gender identities and the impact of gender roles and stereotypes. We talked about how right when you were born, you were socialized, and also as a kid, very impressionable. So being exposed to strict gender norms doesn't allow you to form your own identity. And some examples of that is like being a little girl, you should be wearing pink, be playing with Barbies and be attracted to princesses and stuff like that. And for little boys, they should be playing with Legos and, be getting dirty in the sand, playing with trucks and all that. And we also shared some personal experiences. One girl in our group's name is Devin, and her mom purposely named her that so people wouldn't assume her identity. I also shared my personal experience with stereotypes. I was a football player all my life. So, people expect me to be tough and manly, and I'd be ashamed if I were to ever, show emotion or anything like that. So it was nice to hear people's experience with stereotypes and gender roles and how we can end them so, people are able to be themselves.
Thank you so much. Panelists?
Well, first off, thank you for talking about your own experience with gender expectations. And I think that's really important that we talk about gender expectations. And in today's time period where gender reveal parties, so-called gender reveal parties are somehow a thing, I mean, first off, they're all kinds of awful. They set an expectation where people's gender is expected for them before they're even born. But this is not a new thing because we've been expecting people to act based on gender stereotypes for years, for decades, throughout history. And it's problematic for so many ways, but it's especially problematic for people in the LGBT community because it limits our ability to live freely in our lives. But actually, it's problematic for everyone. And there's actually been research that's shown correlations between these gender stereotypes and issues around women in STEM fields because we have these expectations around femininity and masculinity that hold all of us back, from masculine men and feminine women to masculine women and feminine men and everything in between. And even thinking about this in terms of a linear idea of masculine and feminine is even limiting our ability to be our true selves.
Angie?
Now for our second group representative, please introduce yourself and what topic your group discussed.
My name is Miranda, and our group discussed sexuality and sexual identities. So we all agreed that as we've gone throughout our life, the understanding of different sexualities and identities has increased, and people are becoming more accepting, although there are still like some barriers in the way because of religion or politics. So like an example of this was from my high school. From my freshman year to my senior year, there was a big change because curtains were implemented into the locker rooms to make transgender students feel more safe, and like I saw that more people in my grade were becoming comfortable with coming out. But so there's still obviously barriers because of like we've been socialized to be straight since we were little, and yeah, but things are changing.
Thank you so much. Panelists? Rita?
I think that that's really important to talk about how heteronormativity, or the expectation that everyone is straight until proven otherwise, is just there all the time in so many of our physical structures. So in the spaces that we call home, or that we spend a lot of our work time in or our learning time in, that those are designed to separate people and to put them into different boxes. So I think that's really great that you were talking about those.
I also want to honor the fact that this is in many ways a generational challenge more than a challenge in any other way. People that are going through high school and college today are much more comfortable than their parents' generation and generations before them in thinking about gender in these kinds of ways. And the experience that you had to be able to have the locker rooms adapted to today's realities is really a wonderful thing that we should just take a moment to celebrate.
Thank you. Sydney?
Thank you. And now for our next group representative, please introduce yourself and the topic that your group discussed.
Hello, I'm Katie Coslin, and our group discussed gendered bathrooms. There's been a lot of debate over like bathroom bills, such as one in North Carolina, where trans individuals aren't allowed to use the bathroom that they identify with. And our group discussed that trans individuals should be allowed to use the bathroom they identify with. However, the reality is, in the culture that we are in and the climate that we live in, is that it's not going to be a safe climate for them to use the bathroom that they identify with because of the animosity that a lot of people feel towards the trans community. So we thought that the best solution was to have gender-inclusive bathrooms. On the Lehigh campus, we do have gender-inclusive bathrooms, and I think that's an effective solution towards our problem. And in a few decades, we could move towards allowing the trans community to use the bathrooms that they identify with.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I think it's fantastic that y'all are asking that question of like, who is safe to like go pee, right? I think that's a really critical question to ask when it comes to this idea of like a basic human function that we should all be able to use our restroom, whether it be in a public space, private space, whatever it is, to be able to access that basic human right is so important. And I don't think we realize that, especially for myself as someone who has been able to use the bathroom that aligns with my gender identity and not have that questioned is really, really important. And one piece that I want to just like touch on is the importance of recognizing that a bathroom politic that is inclusive is also not just going to impact the trans population. So my sister has a disability, and I oftentimes will have to serve as her caregiver when we're going out. And I feel uncomfortable taking her into the men's room or myself going into the women's room because of these gendered expectations that we have, right? So this idea of having an inclusive bathroom politic is going to not just impact the trans community, but also the disabled trans community and folks who have disabilities and have caregivers or who are participating in elder care. And so I think we see these cross sections of justice movements that can come together.
I do just want to challenge a little bit with your question, though, because you're absolutely right that we should be prioritizing safety for trans community members, whether we're talking about safety in restrooms or safety anywhere else in people's lives. But we also need to remember that from a rights perspective, not all trans people have the same stories, histories, or experiences. And that for trans people who feel safe using the restroom that matches their gender identity, that's absolutely where they have the right to use the restroom. And for trans people who would prefer to use a private restroom, that's also perfectly fine. But we shouldn't be saying to trans people, you may not use the regular public restroom that is available for everyone else. Because when we do that, we're othering people. So it's important that we allow people to use the restroom that matches people's gender identity while also providing private, lockable, single-person restrooms that anyone can use. Trans people, people who are cisgender, people with disabilities, people who just prefer increased privacy when they're using the restroom. And I think that when we do that, we end up in a situation where all people can feel safe when they're using the restroom.
Okay, thank you. Angie?
Great. For our next group representative, please introduce yourself and what topic your group discussed.
Okay, my name is Vicky Jackdeo, and our group discussed health issues that impact the LGBTQ community. So my group felt that the solution is both a mixture of having educating the public about LGBTQ problems and also having resources available to them. So we said that part of the solution is having events like these and similar ones that help LGBTQ folks feel safer and accepted in social media, family life, and schools, but also having resources available readily and advertised, because we felt that there are resources out there, but maybe people don't know about them. So it's just having them available, but also advertised better so they know about it and use it.
Thank you so much.
So throughout our lives, LGBT people experience challenges with our health, literally from birth through death. And these challenges are the results of both increased risk behaviors within the LGBT community, but those aren't caused solely by us. They're caused by a society that is not designed to serve our community. It's that the healthcare system wasn't made for LGBT people. It wasn't made to serve our needs. And as a result, there's these barriers in place, from discrimination to violence to negative experiences that people have with their healthcare professional. And here in the Lehigh Valley, actually 1 in 4 LGBT people say that they've had a negative experience with a healthcare professional. 1 in 10 say that they fear going to the doctor as a result. These aren't challenges that are caused by the LGBT community, but they're reasons why we experience worsened health outcomes. And so this is absolutely one of the top priorities for our movement today. Tobacco is a leading cause of death for LGBT people. LGBT people experience cancer at higher rates and get screened for cancer at lower rates. We're not getting tested for HIV at the rates we should be. And again, this is because of structural barriers that are in place, legal discrimination as well as structural discrimination that prevents LGBT people from achieving what Healthy People 2020 defines as health equity, which is the attainment of the highest levels of health for all people.
Would anyone like to add on to that?
I think if I extend that into other gender equity concerns, thinking about the way those structures and institutions limit people's access to health care. So the high, ridiculously high, and it makes me kind of think, well, how does this happen? But I know how it happens. Of Black maternal mortality in the United States is completely fixable. It is structured in racism and sexism, and there are ways to fix that. They're not that difficult. So if we just take a little bit of time working together and looking at some of those problems and not trying to fix the symptom, but get to the problem, I think we're going to have a lot more happy people, not just healthy people.
Thank you so much. Sydney?
Our next group representative, please introduce yourself and the topic your group discussed.
Hey, my name is Dior, and I'm a freshman at Lehigh University. Our group discussed the representation of the LGBT community within media outlets, and we talked about what benefits would arise for the LGBT community from them starring in popular TV shows and movies. We believe the benefits will only arise when when the people that are being represented within the movie, the LGBT community and their identity is not being highly censored and within the plot of the movie. We believe that if they just sneak it in, if they just mention it to normalize the situation, to normalize their identity, it would be really beneficial, because then many people that will watch the movie will believe that everything is normal. There's nothing, it doesn't have to be censored. It doesn't have to be a big deal, because when you make it a big deal, there's a lot of obstacles arise, because not a lot of people want to watch the movie around around someone that's around a plot that's strictly centered on the LGBT community and their identity.
Okay, thank you. Panel, Scott?
Yeah, so the idea of representation is so important. So there are some studies out there that specifically look at children's literature, and there are some studies that suggest that children who actually read stories and are taking in messages that reflect their identities, whether that be along markers of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, that they actually have higher levels of self-esteem, right? And what we know is that our current curriculum, oftentimes in K through 12 education, is pretty normative and heteronormative to the extent that you're oftentimes only seeing white people. You're seeing heterosexual couples. The messages that you're taking in create this unconscious bias that we don't even know we necessarily have, which can lead to those things like the negative health outcomes, can lead to internalization of homophobia, can lead to a lot of really harmful outcomes if we don't start even at that very young age of kind of changing the messaging a little bit.
I think that certainly we're living in this era of Queer Eye and Love, Simon at the same time, and we should first recognize that this is a transformative moment in American society where we can have a major Hollywood hit, right, that's centering on the coming out experience of a queer youth. That is a wonderful moment in time, and yet we can also challenge the ideas around the fact that it's not the story that the LGBT youth here in the Lehigh Valley really experience. The LGBT youth we serve at Bradbury Sullivan LGBT Community Center don't have the same kind of Hollywood happy ending all the time. And so it's a reminder that not every LGBT youth has that same Hollywood happy ending. But it's also amazing and wonderful that, that the images of the LGBT community are available so that LGBT youth can find role models in the TV shows and movies that they watch, because that wasn't available in generations before. And I think we can both honor this moment in time and also critique it simultaneously.
Rita, anything to add? Good. And just to follow up, what do you think are the stereotypes of LGBTQ in movies or TV shows that are negatively impacting?
Oh, there's a whole history of that. So from the lesbian vampires, the whole genre of films around that were created, to kind of the Just Jack of Will and Grace, and the ideas around even Rosie O'Donnell in terms of presenting a certain image of lesbian identity, and yet we have to be able to critique those stereotyped images while also recognizing their moments in time. And we have to be able to think about the relevance today in terms of having physical role models, physical representation that just is changing the ways in which LGBT youth are able to see themselves reflected in the media that they're accessing.
I would add there's a role that typically cis white women have to play in perpetuating some of those negative stereotypes of I need the gay guy sidekick to prop up my character and be the funny person to my serious moody stuff and help me find my straight cis guy. So there's another sort of side to that I think that some women play into.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. For our next group representative, please introduce yourself and what topic your group discussed.
My name is Robert, and my group discussed the wage gap and what protections can be placed by the government and employers to ensure that the wage gap doesn't continue. So we thought about employers and how to increase accountability for them. So we thought about imposing legislation that would force employers to monitor the pay of their employees to ensure that there isn't any pay discrimination going on. Some other ideas we had for the government was to further ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, impose national medical and family leave policies, and we also thought about raising the minimum wage for workers who rely solely on, not solely, but a majority of their salary based on tips to help them out with that.
Thank you. And our group is coming up with some good possible solutions. Panelists, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that you've done a great job of talking about the complexities of the wage gap, that it's not just about what am I taking home in my salary, it's also the benefits package. And there are some states who are trying to enact additional legislation to keep employers from asking prospective employees how much they've made at their previous positions. That can sometimes be used against the prospective employee to say, well, because you've been paid so much less in the past, we probably don't have to offer you quite as high a salary in your future job, which just recreates the wage gap and why that inequity happens. Adding in the family leave, family building, thinking about how people are making salaries by the hour are really important. And I think the next step is to also think about why and how do we as a culture value certain jobs over others? Why do we pay some of those jobs only by the hour? Why do we pay other jobs a salaried position? And if we take a look at what gender identity and what person is holding those jobs, we kind of start to see a pattern. So why do we think that? Are they based upon some of the, back to the original question, gender roles that we grow up with or that we re-indoctrinate different generations with about who's supposed to be home, who's supposed to be out in the workforce, and even what an ideal worker is?
Thank you. Moving on to our final group representative, please introduce yourself and the topic that your group discussed.
My name is Daniela. I'm a senior at Lehigh. My group discussed the underrepresentation of the female and LGBTQ communities in Congress. There are currently 535 members of Congress, and only 106 of them are females, and only 7 are LGBTQ representatives. So we sort of talked about how privilege and different levels of education and sort of what you're exposed to as you're growing up are what lead you to, say, a role in politics, and those sorts of, we sort of have this like stereotype in our mind for what a leader is, and that's usually probably a white male who has specific personality traits, and that doesn't necessarily sculpt an amazing leader in our society, because we need more diverse people to bring different perspectives to like bring active change to our society as a whole on any level. So like we were talking about, you know, how could we combat that? We think that starting with education, you know, from a younger age, sort of like instilling a mindset of leadership in communities and places that they might be lacking is super important. And then also like getting people who really care about this kind of stuff to, you know, fund certain people that may not have been like the stereotypical politician in the past. And we think with all of this that like it could lead to a much more effective sort of government state in general. So.
Thank you so much. Panelists, your thoughts?
I think those are really important points, that getting different kinds of people in government spaces help to widen the array of experiences and voices. I also would caution us to be careful that just because the body looks different doesn't mean the mind is different. So if I'm thinking about the push for women to run for Congress right now and for any elected position, it's really giant, and it's very similar to what you were talking about. Like, we live in this moment of, wow, this is so awesome, I'm really excited, and let's just think about this a little bit more, because it doesn't necessarily mean that just because I identify as a woman that I'm going to go into a space and advocate for gender equity. I may, for all kinds of reasons, be afraid to do that, be ill-equipped to do that, be backed by money that tells me not to do that. There are a lot of reasons that could inhibit me. At the same time, I probably can't help but bring in my experiences as a woman to be into those spaces, and that's a good thing. I think it's also connected to media representation. So yes, Scandal is over, and I'm there we go, I put it out there. But to have Mellie Grant in the presidency, they were talking about a lot of tough topics about what does that mean. When she had to have her annual breast exam, they had no place to take her because no one had ever imagined a woman president needing a breast screening. So when we have an elected official right now in our Congress who says, what's the dress code for my baby who I'm nursing? Are they still supposed to follow the Senate? Those are good conversations to start having, and it starts to change the ways in which we think about work, wage gap, and who can occupy what kinds of positions.
So I think that I just need to say once that Bradbury Sullivan LGBT Community Center is a nonprofit that does not get involved in elections in any way. But I think that it's a really valuable question to ask about who's sitting around the table making decisions, and that there is a value in saying that that when a diverse group of people are involved in the decision making, we will sometimes be able to get to solutions that don't leave people out as much. And that whether we're talking about Congress or whether we're talking about organizations or any form of decision making, it's valuable to have diverse physical representation. And there's not enough representation of diverse voices in the halls of government at many different levels, whether we're talking about Pennsylvania or in Washington. And that I believe that for LGBT people, we are served better when we have a seat at the table. So that's not specific to any race or any election, but that in general, that group of people will be able to better serve the LGBT community when there are LGBT people there able to say, but you're leaving me out, right? And I think that's just important to always remember.
Thank you.
The only thing that I would add is that there's this lack of possibility models out there, right? So as Rita mentioned with Scandal, like it's rooted again in that K-12 curriculum or in what we're seeing and what we're taking in. So if you don't have that possibility and idea that you could be there one day, then how are you going to get there, right? And so if we can, even if we don't currently have the representation, but look at narratives like Melly Grant, have books in our preschool curriculum being read to in early childhood education that allows people to imagine themselves as occupying a space that has been told that it's not for them, that can be pretty powerful.
Thank you. And I just want to throw in a final question. And Scott, you mentioned this earlier, that it's not necessarily about the integration and more so transforming society. So for the audience at home, what can we do now to start the transformation?
Wow. That is a great question. I mean, we touched on this a little bit, but again, like situating yourself as a learner and being willing to engage in a potentially intimidating topic is really important. And modeling that for other people and leading the way, I think, is an important starting point.
Rita?
Yeah, I echo those sentiments, and being okay and being uncomfortable, doing as much research on my own and not making someone who's different than me spend every waking hour telling me all of their history and what I don't know, and being okay being fearful. It's all right to feel that way, being honest with oneself. I do think that we've seen tonight how many people are having those conversations, and that's really makes me really happy, and I think that is where a lot of the transformation is already starting to happen.
We certainly need to transform society, but right now, our communities are under attack. Women are under attack, LGBT people are under attack, communities of color are under attack, immigrants are under attack, Muslims are under attack. And we're living in this society where historically vulnerable communities are vulnerable to political attacks on our basic rights. And I think that right now, whether we are from one of these communities that's under attack or not, we need to do everything we can to ensure that, that all of us are living in a society that treats us with dignity and respect, and that values our basic humanity and our human rights. And soon, I hope, we will get back to a point where we can focus our energy proactively. But right now, I feel like we're on the defense. And I feel like we need to use this moment when we're on the defense to adequately defend those that are constantly under the attacks that we are seeing every day and every week. I wish that we were able to do both at the same time. But right now, we have to spend every waking moment resisting the attacks that are harming especially communities that were already vulnerable to legal attacks to begin with.
Thank you all so much. This concludes our final Finding Our Common Thread discussion. PBS 39 would like to thank Lehigh University's Global Citizenship Program and the Center for Community Engagement. We would also like to thank Angie and Sydney for co-hosting this program, our panelists for sharing their thoughts, and our studio audience for their participation. Go to pbs39.org to continue the conversation or to watch other topics on Finding Our Common Thread. I'm Tracy Yatzko, and have a great night.